Imagine this. You release information you think the public really needs to see, and then, almost overnight, bam, you're cut off from the global financial system.
Yeah, it sounds like something out of a movie, doesn't it? A thriller, maybe.
Exactly. But it actually happened. It's this digital David versus Goliath story. WikiLeaks, controversial website, going head-to-head with massive financial companies.
It's a fascinating case study.
So today, we're doing a deep dive into that financial blockade, the one imposed on WikiLeaks right after their huge Cablegate release. That was back in, November 2010?
That's right, late 2010. And Cablegate, well, that really changed everything for them and for how governments viewed them.
Remind us, what exactly was Cablegate again?
Okay, so Cablegate was the release of something like 250,000 classified U.S. diplomatic cables. 250,000 documents.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, think about it. These were the candid, behind-the-scenes messages between U.S. embassies and the State Department. Assessments of world leaders, internal discussions about foreign policy. Stuff never meant for public eyes.
Like pulling back the curtain on international diplomacy.
Completely. Uncensored, sometimes brutally honest. It gave this unprecedented look at how things really worked, or at least how the U.S. saw them working.
And WikiLeaks itself.
Yeah.
They weren't exactly shrinking violets before this, were they?
Not at all. They were founded, 2006, by Julian Assange. And their whole mission was this idea of principled leaking.
Right, exposing corruption in governments, corporations.
Exactly. And they'd already made waves. Remember the Guantanamo Bay procedures, the collateral murder video?
Oh yeah, that video was shocking.
And the huge Afghanistan and Iraq war logs. So they definitely had a track record of releasing highly sensitive stuff. They were already controversial.
But Cablegate felt different. Bigger.
Oh, definitely. The sheer scale, the direct hit on U.S. diplomacy, the potential damage to relationships, it was explosive. A whole other level.
And wasn't there also the whole Chelsea Manning situation happening around then?
Yes, absolutely. That adds another really important layer. Chelsea Manning, known then as Bradley Manning, had been arrested back in May 2010.
For earlier leaks.
Initially, yeah. But then later accused of being the source for Cablegate, too. So you had this, perfect storm brewing, the leaks, the source arrested, massive global attention.
So this deep dive, it's not just about the blockade itself, is it?
No, not at all. We need to look at how WikiLeaks responded, which was, pretty surprising in some ways. And there's this amazing, almost unbelievable meeting involving a tech giant later on.
Intriguing. Okay, let's get into the blockade itself. How did it actually start? What was the immediate fallout from Cablegate?
Well, the U.S. government reaction was swift and very, very strong. You had Secretary of State Hillary Clinton publicly condemning the release in no uncertain terms.
And legally?
Attorney General Eric Holder announced a criminal investigation was being launched. That was December 6th, 2010. That sends a powerful message,
Definitely. And this wasn't just official statements, right? There was pressure elsewhere.
Oh, yes. You had figures like Senator Joe Lieberman very publicly calling for companies to stop providing any services to WikiLeaks, basically urging them to cut ties.
So the pressure was mounting, and then the financial companies started acting.
Almost immediately. It happened really fast. PayPal was, I think, the first major one, December 3rd, 2010.
So even before Holder's announcement?
Just before, yeah. PayPal blocked their account, citing a policy violation, basically, facilitating illegal activity. They even blocked the account of the WU Holland Stiftung.
Who were they?
A German foundation that was helping process donations for WikiLeaks, so that route was cut off too.
Okay, so PayPal's out. Who was next?
Then just a few days later, around December 7th, you had both Visa and MasterCard jump in.
Same reasoning.
Pretty much, yeah. Both cited their internal rules that prohibit facilitating illegal actions. Again, that term illegal is key here.
Because WikiLeaks hadn't actually been convicted of anything illegal at this point.
Exactly. There was no court ruling, no official designation saying their activities were illegal. These were decisions made by the companies, citing their own policies under, considerable public and political pressure, you could argue.
Right. And it didn't stop there.
No. A bit later, December 18th, Bank of America joined in. They said they had a reasonable belief that WikiLeaks activities weren't consistent with their internal policies. A bit vague, perhaps.
It seems that way.
And then Western Union, around December 21st, reportedly put WikiLeaks on their interdiction list.
Which is basically a blacklist.
Essentially, yeah. Blocking donations through their service, too. So within about 3 weeks, almost every major conventional channel for receiving funds was shut down.
The timing is just remarkable. So close together.
It really is. It strongly suggests either some level of coordination or at least a shared understanding among these companies about the risks, both reputational and possibly political, of being associated with WikiLeaks at that moment.
A very sudden financial isolation.
Extremely sudden. And remember, this is all happening against the backdrop of intense condemnation from U.S. officials and that ongoing criminal investigation. The climate was pretty hostile towards WikiLeaks.
So faced with this financial wall basically going up, what did WikiLeaks do? They couldn't just ignore it.
Oh, definitely not. Julian Assange was very vocal. He publicly slammed it as a politically motivated blockade, pointing the finger directly at the U.S. government.
I remember seeing something about him with company logos.
Yeah, at a press conference, he actually displayed the logos of Visa, MasterCard, PayPal, Bank of America upside down. A pretty clear visual protest.
And the financial impact. He must have quantified it.
He did. He claimed the blockade caused a massive, 95% drop in their revenue. 95%.
That's crippling for any organization.
Absolutely. And it forced them into making a really drastic decision regarding their core mission.
Which was?
In October 2011, so about 10 months into the blockade, they announced they were temporarily suspending their publishing operations.
Wow. Stopping publishing for a publishing organization.
Exactly. They said it was necessary to basically regroup, focus all the remaining resources on fighting the blockade legally and trying to find new ways to fundraise. It shows how severe the pressure was.
So they decided to fight back through the courts.
Yes. They launched legal challenges, or at least pre-litigation actions, in a whole bunch of countries.
Like where?
Iceland, Denmark, the UK, Brussels, even the US and Australia. It was a pretty broad legal counteroffensive.
And any major specific lawsuits?
A big one was an antitrust complaint filed with the European Commission in July 2011. They argued that Visa Europe and MasterCard Europe acting together like this violated EU competition rules.
Okay, that sounds like a strong argument. What happened with that?
Well, it didn't ultimately go WikiLeaks' way. In late 2012, the commission gave a preliminary decision basically saying they wouldn't pursue it.
Why not?
They seemed to accept the company's argument that they needed to restrict services in this case to avoid potential liability or, significant damage to their brands if they were seen facilitating potentially illegal activities.
So a setback in Europe. Did they have any success anywhere?
They did, actually. A significant win in Iceland, of all places.
Iceland. Tell me about that.
They sued Valitor, which was the Icelandic company that processed Visa and MasterCard payments there. Valitor had stopped processing donations, citing the same reasons.
In the court?
The Icelandic Supreme Court ruled in favor of WikiLeaks in July 2012. They ordered Valitor to start processing payments again immediately or face pretty hefty daily fines.
So a clear victory there. That must have been a boost.
Definitely a public relations win, and a practical one in Iceland at least. It showed the blockade wasn't legally untouchable everywhere.
Was there anything happening legally in the U.S. itself?
Yes, there was a related case. DataCell, which was a company that helped WikiLeaks with payment processing, filed a suit in Virginia in late 2014.
Against who?
Against Visa, MasterCard, and Visa Europe, seeking, I think, around $5 million in damages.
And the outcome of that one?
Our sources don't actually detail the final result of that specific Virginia lawsuit, so it's a bit unclear.
It really paints a picture of these complex, multi-front legal battles against incredibly powerful financial entities. Very tough terrain.
Extremely tough.
Yeah.
And expensive, which was obviously a major issue for WikiLeaks, given the blockade itself.
Let's circle back to the role of the U.S. government in all this. WikiLeaks claimed direct pressure. What's the evidence?
Well, you have the sequence of events, which is highly suggestive. The very public, high-level condemnations from Clinton and Holder.
The criminal investigation being announced right as the blockade kicked in.
Exactly. Senator Lieberman's public calls for companies to act. And there were reports, too, about the State Department having communications with PayPal regarding WikiLeaks.
So circumstantial evidence seems strong.
It's certainly suggestive of, at minimum, strong influence or creating a climate where companies felt compelled to act. WikiLeaks, for their part, never wavered from saying it was direct U.S. pressure.
But wasn't there a finding by the U.S. Treasury that complicates this narrative a bit?
Yes, and this is a really crucial piece often overlooked. In January 2011, the Treasury Department actually looked into whether WikiLeaks could be formally blacklisted, put on sanctions lists.
All right.
They concluded there were no lawful grounds to do so. They couldn't designate WikiLeaks as, say, a terrorist financing entity or something similar that would legally require banks to block them.
So the blockade wasn't based on any formal U.S. government order or designation.
Correct. Which leads us to this idea of economic censorship.
Explain that. What does that mean here?
It's basically the idea that governments can achieve censorship-like effects without passing explicit laws or issuing direct orders. They can use informal pressure, political rhetoric, the threat of future regulation.
Kind of shaping the environment so financial institutions feel they have to act?
Exactly, to protect their own interests, their reputation, maybe avoid regulatory scrutiny down the line. It's influence rather than direct command. Interestingly, years later, in 2024, there was discussion and rules proposed around fair access to financial services, which seems to acknowledge this very problem, banks potentially denying services based on political pressure or reputational risk rather than objective financial risk.
So maybe no smoking gun memo saying block WikiLeaks, but the context, the timing, the official rhetoric, it all points towards significant informal pressure playing a role.
I think that's a fair assessment. The sequence of events strongly implies it, even if direct proof of an explicit instruction is missing. It's a powerful way to exert control without leaving obvious fingerprints.
Okay, so WikiLeaks is financially cut off, fighting legal battles. They needed another way to get funds, didn't they?
Desperately. And this is where things get really interesting technologically. They turned to something pretty novel at the time.
Let me guess, Bitcoin.
You got it. Around June 14th, 2011, WikiLeaks announced they would start accepting Bitcoin donations.
June 2011. That was still pretty early days for Bitcoin, wasn't it?
Very early. It was a bold move. It made them one of the first sort of high-profile organizations to really embrace cryptocurrency as a way around traditional financial systems, a real pioneer in that sense, driven by necessity.
What did the existing Bitcoin community think about this? Were they welcoming?
It was actually a mixed reaction, quite controversial within the Bitcoin world itself.
How so?
Well, some people, including apparently Satoshi Nakamoto himself, Bitcoin's creator.
The mysterious Satoshi.
Right. He reportedly expressed concern. The worry was that associating Bitcoin so publicly with a highly controversial group like WikiLeaks, which was under intense government scrutiny, might attract negative attention to Bitcoin itself, potentially destabilize the whole project when it was still very fragile.
Don't kick the hornet's nest, basically.
Something like that, yeah. There was a real fear it could bring down unwanted regulatory heat or government crackdowns on Bitcoin itself.
But WikiLeaks went ahead anyway. How did it work technically?